Orange,
Hey everyone, it's Jamie and welcome back to my channel. I was inspired by Little Simsy and her Let's Build a Farm play, or build, where she did a Let's Build and did a multiple part series on making a farm. And I really wanted to make my own farm because I grew up in New Hampshire. There were a lot of farms left over actually, despite farming no longer being like the main source of income or economy for the area. Of course, I'm not going to be doing Let's Build, I'm doing a speed build. It's still going to be multiple parts because there's a lot I did in this build that I really just didn't want to cut out. Of course, I want to take this moment to talk a little bit about New England and its history. So I grew up in New England. I'm not sure pretty sure I've mentioned this before, but if you're new to the channel or don't know, I grew up in New England, specifically New Hampshire. I now live in kind of the Boston area in Massachusetts. And I just want to take this moment because I don't really talk about myself too much on this channel. I talk a lot more about especially my speed builds. I do a lot of history stuff because I studied history in college. I love history, and a lot of my builds and gameplay are actually inspired by history. Even though so far my Let's Plays have been all hot messes. But anyway, let's just jump into this. So New England is the oldest clearly defined region in the United States. While it wasn't the first area to really be colonized in the Americas or the United States, it was the first area to really be defined in one way. And it was really settled mostly by the English pilgrims that were fleeing religious persecution in England. These were the Puritans. Anyone who's taken a basic English or a basic history class in the United States will know this. We also have Thanksgiving, which is kind of based on a false idea of what these pilgrims and their relations with the indigenous people were like. But we're not going to be spilling that tea today. So these pilgrims came here in 1620 and started the Plymouth colony. For some context that I always think is so interesting, so in 1620 in Europe, specifically more in the southern part, was when the Baroque period was going on, and the Baroque period is full of opulence, and it's all about kind of about like money, and there's some more liberal thinking during that time, liberal for 16th or for 17th century Europe. Now we'd probably call it a little archaic and backwards, but for the time at least. And you have these Puritans in New England, or not in New England, but coming from England, that were a little bit more backwards thinking. You could say they called themselves the Puritans because they believed they had very pure beliefs, very pure relations with God and stuff. Very strict, have very strict rules. And as we see, this puritanical thought really defines New England, even to this day, whether or not we really think about it or not. So the Puritans come here, not even 100 years later, we have the Salem witch trials going on. These Puritans believing witches need to be, be put to death. These women put to death because they believed that they were witches. And then on top of that, even here in the 21st century, we see, Salem, Massachusetts, for example, still really obsessed with that history. It really defines them. We can talk about whether or not, how fair that is, seeing as most of the witch hunts actually happened in Danvers, Massachusetts, but Salem really kind of is the one that gets the name claim, the one that gets to keep it. And that's, a really interesting part of Salem's history and kind of the 21st century, and it's the way it defines itself and defines their identity is around this idea of the Salem trials. And then on top of that, a really more interesting one is how so many puritanical laws still exist here in the United States. Boston and Massachusetts, you know, especially around alcohol. For a very long time in Massachusetts, you couldn't legally purchase alcohol on Sundays. I'm not really sure when that law changed or if it really has like officially changed, but and because of this, New Hampshire actually built these massive liquor outlets on the border because, you know, so many people were coming from Massachusetts on the weekend to buy alcohol from New Hampshire. And like to this day, because, you know, it's cheaper also to go across the border into New Hampshire to buy due to taxes. You know, New Hampshire still has these massive liquor outlets. And so funny because so many people who aren't from the area see these massive outlets and think, you know, is everyone in New Hampshire like a heavy drinker? Which, you know, not a unfair assumption, but really it's more coming from those old puritanical beliefs that are still in our laws, whether we realize it or not. And then on top of that, in at least in Boston, I'm not really sure for the rest of Massachusetts, you can't buy alcohol after 11 p.m., which, fair enough, you know, do you really need to? But, you know, when you're college age and at a party and you're starting to run low, you know, and it's past 11, you know, you kind of are like, well, I guess the party's gonna be ending soon. You know, so it's really interesting because, you know, there's other random puritanical laws or beliefs still in our minds, but also from the Puritans also, because the Puritans were the ones who set up the Boston Latin School, which was the oldest public school in the United States. So, you know, they really were pushing for public education, while, you know, in Europe and even in other parts of the United States for a long time, public education wasn't really a thing, you know? Education was for the rich and you had to pay for it, you know? New England, specifically Massachusetts, has always pushed for public education. It's really interesting now because we think of New England as a very liberal area, and it is for the most part. But it has this really interesting relationship with the Puritans and puritanical beliefs. But I really want to talk a little bit more about the farm culture also, because in New England, when it was first founded, was really based in farming, and, you know, it has to do with the times, and it was also just, you know, what was readily available, and a lot of things that were the primary crops were like wheat, rye, barley, turnips, and carrots, onions, you know, a lot of things that we still grow here in New England. But as the Industrial Revolution comes along, and then, you know, my favorite period, the Victorian period, factory economy becomes very big in this area. You know, you have like the Lowell girls, you have all these new rich people, the nouveau rich, moving into these big Victorian homes with the money they've made from their factories. And it's really interesting because then we start seeing this decline in farming, and a part of it also had to do with the fact that New England, compared to other parts of the United States, you know, had a much shorter growing season, as well as a much more rockier climate and harsher kind of weather compared to some other parts, making it, you know, really hard to actually be a sustainable farmer year-round. And as you know, as we are moving more west and we're finding more lands that you really can grow in longer, grow more in, it changes. With that saying though, where I grew up in New Hampshire, there was still farmland. Most of it was corn, if I'm gonna be honest. Corn is pretty easy to grow once you get it down. And local corn. more. Oh, people, especially where I lived in New Hampshire, people went wild for the local corn every summer. And not just like the locals, but also tourists, because, you know, after World War II, factory life pretty much, the factory economy is done for. And as I talked about some of my other videos, as that factory economy ends, and, you know, the Victorian period ends and people aren't living in the Victorian homes anymore, the economy, you know, just really needs to shift. And, you know, we see now in the 21st century, the economy is really based in education. You know, Boston's a college town, really. Most of the people there are going to college, actually. Like, a large chunk of the population is going to the, like, hundreds of colleges, if not in the city, but in the area, as well as mechanical factoring. It's very big in New England, pharmaceuticals, the sciences as well. So it's really interesting how it keeps changing, how it kept changing. And, you know, we still see farming in New England, but it's just not as prevalent. So part of this inspiration for this build was, you know, I grew up in New England. I'm familiar with our history. I'm familiar with, you know, how farming worked, how farming, you know, what it was like to live in a town where there were people who were trying to survive off of farming and how hard it was for them. But yeah, so I think I'm going to end it around here. Like I said, this is going to be a multiple part video, or a series almost, all going to be speed builds, but that's because I have so much that I put into this build, and especially with the landscaping, wanting to make a farm, you know, I really just didn't want to cut that out. As well as here, I wanted to show you guys a little bit about how I did the porch, because what I wanted was a lot of porches, especially where I grew up, with when people have these big kind of wraparound porches, you have the wood going two different ways where they meet at the corners. So that's what I was doing here by using the diagonal like squares, turning into little diagonal triangles, and then also using the arrow keys to change which way the grain of the wood runs. And what it does is it creates this this effect that, you know, that a lot of porches have. As well as, you know, I spent a long time, as you will see, on just the landscaping. But anyways, thank you for watching this video. Thank you for listening to me rant about New England. Hopefully in the next videos I will rant maybe a little bit less and talk about some other things, especially when we get to the barn, because I'm going to talk a lot about my inspirations for the barn on the property, and you might not be expecting to hear what I'm going to say. So yeah, thank you so much, and look forward, watch out for my next video on this, because I'm very excited to create these. Thank you so much and have a great day.